Welcome to Modern Money. My name is Keith Grossman. I'm the president of enterprise at MoonPay. The goal of Modern Money is to simplify the complexities surrounding crypto and decentralized finance, also known as DeFi. Not just the how, but the why. And why this matters today and why this will matter to you as a professional. Today, I'm joined by two dear friends, Ian Rogers, who is the Chief Experience Officer, and Ariel Wengroff, the Executive Producer and VP of Communications at Ledger. Ian, Ariel, welcome to Modern Money.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Excited, friend.
So now, I love this. The two of you never do anything together. And I know you both collectively, and I know you both individually. And so when I wanted to do this, I wanted to make sure that we actually had you both on together. And what the three of us all have in common is we all have media backgrounds. And so I actually want to start by just asking the two of you, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you each enter into the crypto space and what was your aha moment on it?
You want to go first? Okay.
Look, I love this. I have the two of you on, so you don't know how to play pickup basketball in an interview. This is amazing.
No,
right?
We're like two people that aren't allowed to be on the same plane at the same time.
It's fantastic. By the way, this is exactly why I wanted the two of you on. So Ariel, why don't you go for it?
Yeah, so I started in politics, and I've always been interested in what is the best medium to reach people for the topic that it relates to. And so it was very clear with politics that red tape was so pertinent, you couldn't get anything done. But with media, you could reach millions of people at once from one simple message or video. And so back in 2014, I started working at Vice, which at the time, which for those who don't know, is a global youth media company, or was the best in the world in its heyday. And when I joined, from the moment I went to the building to 2 weeks later, there was literally a new entrance to it. It was chaos. It was run around the walls, grab a story, grab an idea, and do what you can with it, and may the best win. And they always said, give the students the keys. I was very fortunate to be given multi-million-dollar budgets in my mid-20s and work with whoever I wanted as long as the story worked out. And it was amazing. And so for years, I was able to learn what actually gets young people excited about a topic outside of the boring and homogeneous title that someone else might give it. What is really the root underneath? But what started to happen with the duopoly of Facebook and Google is that the same red tape that we saw in politics and to getting a message out started to take over for telling the right story, because you were serving the advertisers and not the people who actually wanted to hear it. And so it became clear to me that you actually needed to work with a company that had revenue, because actually, instead of what people thought, which was that media had to be separate from paid media, this whole idea of editorial and not, that just didn't exist anymore. Young people want a brand to help lead their identity. And so a lot of brands were getting lost in this old school notion. And so was media. It was just being destroyed. So I started to work more in the brand space, because if you had profit, you had control over the story. And after a startup that was working in this space and launching and selling that during COVID, I was actually advising a company called Liontree on the creator economy. And that's how I learned about blockchain technology, because basically I saw, this is an intergenerational opportunity to reach people and actually have creators, have people own more of their IP, reach the individuals they want to. And I was actually working on it was the time of the SPACs. And I was working on a SPAC that never came about, and I can't say who it was with because he's too famous, but it was about the idea of the individual going public. So I was writing this big manifesto about this whole notion that should be coming, and the bankers came back to me and they were like, Wall Street will never go to this. And all the music CEOs and all these people were coming to us and saying, how do we basically take blockchain technology and use the model we have today? And I was like, I don't want to be a part of using this to do the same thing. I want to use this to break the old thing. And so I got connected to Ian and quite frankly just took the call from the back of a 2007 soft top Jeep Wrangler on my cell phone. And here's this guy starting to tell me about all of these things. And I had the same feeling in my gut that I did when I met Shane at Vice. And I was like, I don't know exactly what this is, but I have to give it a shot. And these are people that are sitting at the table when it's early enough to change it. And that's really what brought me to Ledger and to France. And it's been a great journey. Yeah.
I'm so grateful that you shared that, because I didn't realize that was the connection was into Ian. So Ian, what a great tee up for you.
I'll tell my story briefly, and I'm gonna end with some hiring advice. that dovetails in with Ari's story. So I graduated college in 1994, and I had done a lot of early digital music things. And, starting at the university with Indiana University Music Library, but then with the Beastie Boys, and then Winamp in the late 90s, Yahoo in the 2000s. And the last two things I did in the music business were build Beats Music with Trent Reznor, and then Apple Music with Trent and Jimmy Iovine and Zane Lowe. And then I came over here to Paris to work for LVMH. But the relevant part of that story is that over that 20 years in digital music, what I really became was a student of how technology changes culture. And I felt like because of my deep dive in music, I understood it pretty well in music. And LVMH really was an opportunity for me to see if this goes beyond music. Does my understanding of this does it go beyond the world of music and into culture more broadly? I didn't know. I was not a luxury customer. I wasn't really part of that world. I'm not an advertising person that goes to Cannes Lion. I just had been a person running music businesses, but I built some fundamental theories, and LVMH really was a chance to see, do those things apply there? And of course they do. Because really what we've done is we've had this internet of information that has changed the way that we consume. It's changed what kind of choice do we have. I remember very well a world where Sundays were super boring because there was nothing on television. Our kids don't know that world, right? We now have so much consumer choice that it's completely reconnected us. And to Ari's point, it's reconnected us to brands, and it's changed just the way you reach a consumer. And I think for me, LVMH was an amazing proving ground for that. At the same time, I love being on the forefront. And I don't say that just because I like being in the front. I think it's actually more fun. A consumer internet of 6 billion people is boring. It was really fun doing all of the music things I did, but once it was on every iPhone and there was no chance that you and I were going to go create the next SoundCloud, oh man, what's next? What are we thinking about next? I had been interested in the concept of blockchain since I'd first heard about Bitcoin. My first view, and I heard about Bitcoin back in 2009 through somebody who was in my office at the time, but my take on it was, this threatens state sovereignty, and it will be shut down just like Napster and LimeWire and BearShare were. Not that you can shut down the technology, but you can obviously, and if Jamie Dimon had his way, we would have shut down the companies that work with it, the companies that touch it. But around 2015, for me, I'd realized that the game theory was in because it had gotten sufficiently big. So I invested at that point and followed along. Long story short, I sold my cost basis at the peak of 2017, which turns out to have been like the smartest thing I could have done because I was still in but didn't care anymore. So I was thinking pretty objectively. And then it was the summer of 2020 when Tony Fidel's family and my family were pod families during COVID that we really wound ourselves up, realizing $2 trillion of stimulus in the US, $1 trillion in Europe, the technology's here, this goes. Now, when I moved to Paris, I had become friends with Tony, but also with Pascal Gauthier, who's today the CEO of Ledger. And he had talked to me about coming to work with him at Ledger since 2018, but it was in the summer of 2020 when I said to him, I was like, okay, I'm ready. What are we doing? I've been 5 years at LVMH, and this is clearly a force and something that I just like being in industries at this stage of the industry when the stories are yet to be told. And I think in the big picture, we've already lived through this digitization of all information. And I believe that now we're living through a once in humanity digitization of all value. But we're at the very beginning of that. And so being at the very beginning of that was important to me. But then to come to Ari and the hiring point, one of the theories that I had cooked up at LVMH was this notion that all brands need an editor-in-chief. Now, our friend Brice Partouche, who has Satisfy Running, has extended this to all brands need a creative director, but we can talk about that later. But my theory at the time was a lot of our brands at LVMH had creative directors, and the creative director was expected to be the voice, but that's actually not their day job. Their day job is being creative and spawning creative products. And the job of telling the stories of those products is a job of an editor-in-chief. And the New York Times has an editor-in-chief. Any magazine has an editor-in-chief who has a name. And it's someone that you can see and they have a voice and that can change. And so when I came to Ledger, I was like, I want to have an editor-in-chief. So I didn't know exactly what that was or how it would play out, but I knew that there's a product over here but then we need the storyteller of the product. And so I went out looking for it. So here's where the hiring advice comes in. I think that the best hiring advice, I think people always aim too low when they're hiring. They think they go get somebody they can get instead of thinking about who they would like to get. What my take is, who's the best person on the planet for the job? And then you get to that person. They'll usually have a conversation with you if the conversation is interesting. They will almost always turn you down and tell you no. But then you say to them, I need 5 names. You got to give me 5 names, because the truth is you probably didn't want them anyway. You wanted them like 20 years ago before they had the name, and they probably know who that person is. So I had reached out to somebody in the industry that I trust, and they had actually connected me with someone else. This is how the chain goes. And then I talked to a lot of people. When I talked to Ari, and I remember you were on the phone in that Jeep, I thought it was too good to be true. But I think that it's the combination of everything I just said, like where we both come from, what Ari said in terms of her curiosity, but also having a bigger theory. I wasn't out there with a job description going, I'm looking for someone who meets these criteria. I had a big idea, and I was looking for somebody who I could develop that idea with. Well, I didn't know exactly what it was, but I wanted somebody that I could trust to develop that with me. And so that's how we got to this point, found each other.
You bring up a few things that I think are just absolutely fascinating. I couldn't agree with you more. I always say to people that when networking for jobs, like, you don't want to go to your strongest connections. You actually go to your loosest, right? That's where you find it. If I knew a role to fill for you, I would just tell you like that. But like, most oftentimes, like, I will say, you should check out these 5 people, or you should check out these 3 people. And then it's usually 1 or 2 degrees from the originating source that finds the true talent. And I think people don't necessarily think that's the case. They think it's their closest, tightest links, but it's actually your loosest links that lead to it. You bring up a really interesting point. I couldn't agree with you more, right? I find that when mass adoption takes place, it's just boring. And like, what I saw was the digitization of everything, right? Anything that can be digitized will be. And now what I'm seeing is the tokenization of everything, right? Anything that's digital that can be tokenized will be. But I want to throw this back to Ariel, who, before we jump into anything, if you are the editor-in-chief, we have a branding problem, because you and I have known each other for over 5 years at this point. I've only called you Ariel, and Ian's calling you Ari. And so which one do you want me to call you for this podcast? Do you want to be Ari moving forward for the next 5-10 years, or do you want to stay Ariel? Because you have not correct, and you're the editor-in-chief, and we have
by the way, I will live by this answer too, whichever one you choose.
Fuck. Okay, I'll tell you something. I have gone by Ari until I moved to France. And the French, if you say Ari, it sounds awful. But if you say Ariel, like Ariel, it's so much better. So I tend to go by Ariel in France. At least my alter ego, my Ariel in Paris alter ego. So you can call, Keith, you're a dear friend. You can call me Ari as well. I just don't interrupt. I'm not that person. I'm not like Barbara.
I've become Jan Roger since I live here.
That's really good.
Jan
Roger eats a lot of yogurt.
I feel like we're in that scene from Pulp Fiction, where you know what they call a quarter pounder and cheese in France, right? It's, you know what they call Keith in France? Keith, right? Now, I don't want to get sidetracked for a second. Going to you as the editor-in-chief, in full disclosure, and I've said this publicly a million times over, I am the biggest fan of what you all have built, right? I use Ledger. I have maybe 20 of them in my home office. I've given them out as gifts on every occasion. I think that the utility of your service is infinitely more valuable than people recognize. What is the mission of Ledger, if you as the editor-in-chief want to give it to us right now?
First of all, thank you, Keith, because you have been such a wonderful friend to us and to the brand, like in thick and thin. We want to secure your digital life. Ledger exists to make anything that is of digital value to you, whether it's a secret or it's a public good that's become on-chain. We want to make sure it's secure, that it's easy to use, and that we never compromise on security or self-custody as we build over time. These are really our principles, and it's been quite interesting because this is the 10-year anniversary of the brand. And what we find is every year we have to tell the same story over and over again because there's new people in the space who don't know it. But every year the mission just becomes more true. There's absolutely nothing that has wavered at all about the goal of Ledger. If anything, we're just getting closer to being able to actualize it as more of the thesis comes to fruition. And as we've seen in recent events around the world, also helps to enable that adoption faster.
And then I guess on that note, one thing I would just love from you on this topic is, as you're out presenting Ledger's mission, what's the biggest misperception that the press has, like when they're communicating it?
There's a few things, and Ian, feel free to jump in, but quite frankly, one of the biggest misconceptions with the previous model, with the Ledger Nano model, which is a wonderful model that sold millions of devices, is because it looks so much like a USB stick, people really think that it's actually holding your crypto in it. So if you get it, people think that you can only use it as a vault. You use it, you use it to store your crypto and you put it in a drawer and you leave it and you can't use it again. I will say when I joined, the first thing I saw was Ledger is seen as a utility. It's not seen as a consumer electronics business that you develop a relationship to and you expect it to last forever. And so we needed to use cultural authority to build product authority. And we needed to make sure that people understood that this is something that protects your private key and makes it so that you will always have access to that and that you're doing secure transactions and not something that is vulnerable just because you have it in your pocket. So there's a lot of misnomers that are easy to change, but you have to actually be reaching the right people and in a way where they want to receive it.
Yeah, you can see that in the kind of the evolution of the business too. Because if you go back to 2021, our service business was near zero. We had a little bit of buy in the app. Now we have buy, swap, stake, credit card, Ledger Recover. So we actually have a lot of service and transactional business, but it's with a relatively small number of people, right? If you look at the total Ledger user base, it's still pretty untapped in terms of the total user base taking advantage of that. So I think everything that we've done from just trying to drive education, it's not only perception because it's also education. It is a brain twister to go, well, wait, what do you mean my value isn't in the wallet? No, your value is secure on the blockchain, and what the wallet has is your private key. And wait, why is that important? And why do I need this? And why is it different from Coinbase? And why is it different from MetaMask? And et cetera, et cetera. Like, it takes a lot of education to get someone to where they really understand it deeply. Once you understand it deeply, then things start to fall into place. Like, the next step isn't as hard once you actually understand what's going on. But then it's like getting people to know, I can buy crypto inside of my Ledger. I can swap from self-custody to self-custody right inside of Ledger. I can earn yield right inside. Like, getting there's sort of two steps, I think, getting people's head around what is it? And then what can I do with it? But as Ari said, our mission has always been making all that stuff as easy to do as possible without ever compromising on security and self-custody.
Yeah, you always say, not your keys, not your money. When you say that to me, and I'm in the crypto space, right? And I'm that early adopter community, I know exactly what it means. How do you explain not your keys, not your money at Thanksgiving? To everyone? Like, how are you going to do that?
I think the simplest way to say it is that we secure your digital value better than your phone or your computer can. I think that's something that in very few words, everyone can get their head around. I think we know that we are generally insecure with our phones and our computers, and that there are a lot of dangers there, and that every year for the rest of our lives will be the worst year for cybercrime. I think the average person understands that. The average person has a problem managing their own passwords. That's something that anybody can get their head around. So I think saying that we are a security device that protects your secrets in a way that your phone and your computer can't is probably the simplest way to describe it. But now you've got to start to get into specific use cases for, like, why would you want to do that? And I think another way that I like to put it is you will have digital value in your digital life. That's where I like to start. And because if someone doesn't believe that, I don't want to waste any more energy. I want to say, just come back to me in 5 years. Because I met you in 2002, and you told me you'd never have an email address. And now you do. And so now it's 2024 and you're telling me you'll never have digital value in your digital life. I don't want to carry on with the conversation. Please come back in 5 years. Like, cause I don't have time for this. But now I think most people will go, okay, that makes sense. Yes, we're going to have digital money in our digital lives. Okay. Now it's like, where makes sense to keep that? There's only two reasonable options. One is a trusted custodian, name 5. The other is secure self-custody. And Ledger is the most secure self-custody, and I can convince you of that. To me, if I have a friend, tell me that you've got a trusted custodian, or tell me that you're in the most secure self-custody, you've probably got less than 5 places that it's safe to store your digital value, period, if you add it all up. And what's not acceptable is untrusted custodian. We learned that. Right. And by the way, some of the people you trust might not be trusted tomorrow. We lived through that, whether it was Celsius or FTX or Silicon Valley Bank. Right. Some of the custodians you trust will not be trusted tomorrow. We know that's the case. And now we also need to talk about what does it mean to have secure self-custody. So now to me, you're like getting at the heart of it. But you got to have somebody who actually wants to have the conversation. And if you don't believe that you'll have digital value in your digital life, then okay, I'll talk to you tomorrow.
I just think there's one other piece to this, which is that for Gen Alpha, they're the first generation that's living with their entire lives on the internet. Like they're the full first wave. And the reality is there was a test done recently because some students at school can't have their phones out during the day, right? It has to be put away. And they were genuinely worried that they wouldn't remember their memories during the day because they couldn't take a photo of it. So they will really understand if you said, you know what? Google's not going to give you access to your emails and your photos anymore because you don't own them. And that's actually their choice. You would say, holy shit, I never fully realized that. And if I had a way to make sure that I could own them, and you see so many videos on TikTok and others of people learning how to download their photos onto a hard drive connected USB-C, I actually think if we take away all the nomenclature, the younger generation, as it always works, will figure it out. And then they'll teach everybody else. It's just that we're still stuck in this use case in between. And that I do think that is just holding us back a little bit.
I agreed to build on what you say. When I was in media, people would always ask me, because I had Time Magazine, I had Wired Magazine, I had Business Week. People would say to me this one simple question, which was, is print dead? And I use this example all the time. And I would say, look, everyone likes the extremes, but all I can tell you is if you look at the most simplistic way of looking at life, right? Like life and death, right? Every day that someone dies and leaves this planet, and every day someone is born onto this planet, someone who reads print is not replaced by someone who is born at a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, I don't know what that ratio is, but I do know that it's like this, or it could be like this, but it's a downward ratio. The flip side is digital ownership, right? Like I learned this really in April of 2020 during COVID. You were having a pod staying with Tony Fidel, which we're going to dive into later, Ian, which is fascinating. I was living upstate New York in Clifton Park with my mother-in-law, my wife, my daughter, and our dog in what was like a zoo, right? And I was walking around Clifton Park, and Ariel, you probably remember this from like our conversations. And like I'm walking around Clifton Park and I'm bored out of my mind and I'm lonely. And it was the first time in my life that I realized that my digital identity was equal to my physical identity. Right. And then all of a sudden I came across blockchain technologies, which I always knew Bitcoin, but I wasn't really thinking blockchain technologies. And I'm like, oh my God, if my digital life and my physical life are equal, then if I want to own something physically, I may want to own something digitally. And I look at my daughter who's 11, her name's Ellie. And for the holidays, what does she ask me for? She asked me for Robux. What did she ask me for? She asked me for a digital currency to be used in her metaversal, dimensionalized social media experience to buy a digital asset. Right? Now, she didn't use that terminology. She just said to me, I want this because it gives me that, and that's where my friends are. And to your point, Ariel, that's so true. And I think that for everyone who's not 11, who is not born into this and doesn't have that type of natural propensity towards it, there's a very simple sort of tweener to what you just said about Google or even Apple, right? Erasing your memories, or Google erasing your exchanges, which is if they pass the TikTok ban in the United States, there are over 190 million people that will lose their identity on TikTok in the United States. They'll lose their connections. They'll lose their friends. And for the first time ever, they'll ask, why did this happen? And the idea of my data was being manipulated by a foreign government is not a natural thing for people to understand. But the idea that you took this away from me is something that's easy for people to understand, right? And so that could be a very interesting moment that moves us into this world of decentralization. But I do want to go back to something that you said earlier, which is one of the things that's fascinating with ledgers, it's never been hacked, right? And so you have this perfect scorecard, but you just said something, which is every year, cybersecurity gets tougher, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, wow, like the AI sort of revolution is taking off at a pace that is accelerating every day, right? And as it takes off, you have to assume AI is going to be one of the biggest sort of headaches in the security world, right? And someone will go to an extreme and say, AI will get so good when it gets to quantum computing that there will be no way to protect against that. And my question to you is, how do you build a security company? Because if you're going to hold digital assets, how do you build a security company in a world where there's this perception that AI can overcome any security?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have a podcast episode that's specifically about the quantum challenge, because I think that's the next big cliff hanging out there, and it's worth exploring, and we do a deep dive on that. But for this, I think the best answer is that the only way to be secure is by design, right? You have to operate under the notion that anything that can be broken will be broken. There's a great book by the cybercrime reporter for the New York Times, Nicole Perlroth, called "This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends," that I super recommend everybody reads. It's actually a very readable book, and it puts together like the history of cybercrime and why you should be worried that your local water treatment plant runs on Windows 95, like how embedded technology is into our lives, and what dangers does that bring us, and what's the evolution of those dangers on a global and a state scale. What they talk about in the book is you can't prevent hacks. What you're always trying to do is to minimize the blast radius, right? And so there you start to get secure design for security. So the way ledger products work, to be secure in the space that we're in, it's all about protecting that private key, right? The value that you have is safe on the blockchain. And let's make that first assumption. So then what you have the private key that says, I am the owner of that data, right? So you're trying to protect that key. So how do you protect it? You have to, first of all, it has to be very unique and hard. You can't guess it. So it has to be generated in a secure element and stored in a secure element. Then now you've got some value. The value is owned by that private key. You can say, I am the owner of that value. But now, anytime you do a transaction, you want to send some value, you want to approve a contract, you do a transaction, you have to be safe at that moment too. So that needs to happen inside of that secure element. And you also have to be sure that you know what it is you're doing, because you're basically signing a contract that either says, I transfer this value, or some more complicated smart contract in that. And you need to be able to read, do I know what it is I'm signing? So what we do is that we have the absolute most secure architecture for protecting that private key, the only one that generates the key in that secure enclave, that keeps the key there and does the computation in that secure element. In our case, it's a chip produced by STMicro, who's been around since the 70s doing this chip and pin technology. And we always drive that from a secure screen. Now, there are lots of people that will compromise on those things I just said, and they'll tell you why. They'll have rational reasons as to why, but they are opening themselves up to the types of hacks that you're mentioning. And you're talking about hacks at scale. So the types of hacks that can happen by AI at scale, those are the ones that we're trying to prevent. Now, what we can't prevent is user error, basically, right? You sign a contract wrong, or you go through a social hack that tricks you into giving your PIN code or your secret recovery phrase. Like those ones we can't, but we are able to, using the architecture, we are able to prevent hacks at scale. Now you're always looking out there to go, okay, where could you be attacked at scale? Maybe it's software supply chain. Maybe it is quantum. Security is a moving target. And that's also why we employ tens of people in an area we call the dungeon, and all they're doing is breaking things. They're breaking our products, they're breaking competitor products, they're breaking services, they are pen testing, because with enough time and enough money, anything can be broken, right? So what you're trying to do is you're always in a bit of a cat and mouse game. It's a function of time and value.
So Ledger as a dungeon.
Ledger has a dungeon. We
But
absolutely
go
do.
as they please, Keith.
Okay.
It's not under lock and key.
Okay. And,
It is. I don't have a key. Can you get in there,
Well,
Ari?
No,
I
but
can't get in there.
they have a choice.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the choice. They have,
Yeah.
Just want to make sure. Okay.
Yeah,
Wait a minute.
yeah.
And do you feed them? Do you feed them?
Yeah, we have the most amazing cafeteria. Come on by.
Baguettes.
And then they can go there on their own volition.
Okay, I just want to make sure. This is like an unbelievable sort of like, and it sounds so eloquent when you say it in French, right?
Yeah, the
like, what is
donjon.
it, Fred? The
Donjon.
donjon. Okay, so shifting from the donjon to Tony Fadell for 1 second, because this is a hire that it makes no sense from the outside why someone like Tony Fadell would be at Ledger, right? Like here's someone whose entire career was taking like these like mundane objects in your life and turning them into something like really interesting, really easy, simplifying. When I was at Wired back in the day, we used to cover him all the time. This is someone who's this incredible storied career in innovation, and he's so unique. It's just like both of your stories. How does someone like Tony Fadell come to Ledger, and then what's his role? And then ultimately, I know it ultimately culminated up in Stacks. How do you see Stacks playing out in the larger vision of your organization?
It's a very personal story for me with Tony because, like I said, right when I moved to Paris, long story short, I was introduced to Tony. I hadn't met him before, even though we had both worked on music products at Apple, but we had been there at very different times. And we just became friends. I'm sure he'd say the same thing, actually, that on a personal level, we really needed each other. We were fish out of water coming from California to Paris, and we have a lot of the same things in life that we care about, like technology and music, family, and our families. We have kids around the same age. We actually met on the first day of school because our kids were in the same class just by random. We were trying to set up a coffee date, but it turned out, oh, I'll see you tomorrow, because we realized we were both going to the same place in the morning. And then it took 5 years before I went to Ledger. And he was really instrumental in me going to Ledger because we were all friends with Pascal, but Tony literally did the diligence on the job before I went. He insisted on it. Long story short, again, the whole story is that I'd already quit my job at LVMH, and Tony said, "You're not going there unless I say you can." And I was like, oh shit, what if he uncovers dirt? He goes over to the donjon, but spent time with Charles, the CTO, with other members of the team, came back and went, wow, okay, these guys are the real deal. And Tony has a line in his book where he says, when he has an idea, he runs from it. And if it chases him down, then he listens. And I think that Ledger was one of those ideas where at first I'm sure he was like, I don't have time for this, and maybe it's too small for me, but he can't help it. We did not ask Tony to design Stacks. Tony said, you guys need a product at this price point. And we went, you're probably right. He came back 2 weeks later and said, I know what it is. And we said, okay, what is it? He said, I can't tell you because I'm not sure if it's technically possible yet, which was a bit of foreshadowing to where we had huge delays on Stacks because he picked his design and chose a technology that was very difficult to build. But this is not a story of a company going out and saying, oh, who could we get to do industrial design? This is a story of 6+ years of friendship. And I think, honestly, part of the reason he did it is because he really cares about me as a person, and really wanted Ledger to be successful for all of us. But also, I think more than anything else, it's one of those ideas that he just couldn't run from. I think, like he said, in all of his ideas, he tries to run. But the more you think about it, the more important you realize security is, and the more of a frontier that you realize this is. And I actually think my favorite part of this story is today, where Tony is on our board of directors, and man, we've been to hell and back together. Like, building this thing together was super hard. It really pushed the teams to their limits. And I would say teams, because I think what we've done here is, I really think that this is, if you'd have had Tony and his former Apple colleagues, they couldn't have built this device on their own. It wouldn't be as secure. And if you'd have only had Ledger, we couldn't have built this device on our own. It wouldn't be as sexy and as usable. So it's only the combination of those two. And those cultures are difficult to mix. I think we probably lost some years on our life making those cultures come together in the end. We ended up making it way harder for ourselves than we had anticipated, because this screen was much harder to build and cost more than we had imagined. If we'd have known everything going in, we probably would have gone a different route, but we stayed the course. And we really, really pushed it, and we built it and ultimately got it at the door. So then, after all of that, for Tony to join the board, that is what's rewarding to me, because it means he did the diligence. We came to the company. We designed a product. We changed the teams. We went after this product together. We had major difficulties, like heartbreaking difficulties, where we pre-sold the product to our customer and we're 16 months late delivering it to them. And would have been really easy to fall out during that time. It would have been really easy to point fingers, place blame, fall out, but we didn't. We doubled down. It made us stronger, and stronger as a team, stronger as friends, and now on a board together.
I will say, from an observer perspective, I watched you all go through hell and back with that, through delays. It is amazing to see it in market today. I want to pivot it to Ari for a second. Okay. So now you have Stacks out in the market, you have Nano in the market, you have Recover in the market, you have all of these different sort of items surrounding an individual's security in the market. As the editor-in-chief of Ledger, in 1 year from today, like, what is the story arc that you want to tell about security and how Ledger plays in that?
It's interesting because, to Ian's point, every year it's a moving target, but I think our shortest term goal a year from now would be that someone's got a Flex or a Stacks in their hand. They own multiple. They're using one just to log in, probably to their exchange, maybe to their Google account or to their X account. And they know that it's making their life a little bit more secure and probably simpler by doing that. And then they've got another one, and that's more of their Mint wallet. And if the market is pumping as it is right now, they've probably got a little bit of something in there for a meme coin. And then they've got more of like their vault, which is their savings device at home that they're keeping, right? People, we hope, in a year are having multiple ledgers. They're using them for multiple things. It continues to have an increased need. And we're not seeing it as something that is so complicated, right? Like, you probably have a case or something where you have your phone and you have your ledger next to it and it says something about you and you want to show it off. Not in a way that's ostentatious, but in a way that makes it clear that you're part of this tribe that actually really cares about self-custody or sovereignty without having to use terminology that feels really opaque, and that it just becomes easier. My goal in the next few years is that the stories are actually the thing, and it's less about the devices themselves. I want to know how the ledger helped you. I want to know how it's a part of your everyday life. And we're starting to see that come alive more. And the more that we can just rip apart the pain. And I think that really goes into what Ian was even talking about with Tony, because the beauty, and I encourage anyone to listen to his book, because I self-masochistically did that right before we were announcing Stack. So I would be with him and Ian during the day and then listen to the book at night. And he's true to his word in it, quite frankly, because anytime we would edit anything in the user journey, we had to actually look and see what would that do for the customer. And it's true still to this day. And so all we're trying to do is remove pain. We're just trying to be painkillers. We're not, Ian always says this, we're not selling Coke or Pepsi. We're just trying to make something better for a true need state. So a year from now, I really hope that's more proliferating. And the one thing we haven't really chatted on is we do have a ton in our education business with Ledger Academy, where we really provide free educational resources in many languages to users. And that's become a really important piece of our brand and how we try to show up for different communities around the world, because we have the ease of talking about this, but in a lot of places, like, you actually really need a wallet because it's how you save your funds. And I remember even when the Ukraine war started, there were all these articles about how people saved their value because they took USB sticks across the border. And no one reached out, but like, we knew they had ledgers, right? And for some people every day, this is how they live. This is the future.
Let me say, you said on your desk you have your phone and your ledger. Is there a world where your ledger's in your phone at one point?
I think in any industrial transformation, you have an unbundling and a rebundling. And I think we went through that with the iPod, right? Eventually, first of all, compact discs were unbundled into 99-cent downloads, and they were rebundled into music services. Same with all media. And I think from a security perspective, asking your phone to be secure is not something that's coming anytime soon. Could you and will you ultimately have a Ledger operating system running inside the phone, talking to a secure element, talking directly to the screen? That's possible. And that's something that we have demonstrated in the lab. But that's what it'll take. Asking your phone to be secure is if I said to you, okay, so we have $1 billion in this building and I need you to build security around it. And you go, okay, all right, let me get to that task. I go, oh, wait, sorry. I'm going to put a kindergarten and a shopping mall and a nightclub in this building as well. You would just go, wait, could you not? Like, do you have to? That's really, these things are purpose-built. What people don't understand is that the magic trick here is that this is being powered by the same chip that's in your credit card. So you have this chip in your credit card and it protects the secrets of the bank. And you have this chip and it's in your passport and it protects the secrets of the government. This protects your secrets. It's that big. Your point about the Ukraine war, I was talking to a journalist in New York, and at the end of the interview, she said, oh, by the way, I just want to thank you because my husband and I were able to get all of our assets out of Russia on a ledger. So it is freedom technology in that way. And what it really does fundamentally is it protects your private key. So it protects your secrets. And that could be for your logins. It could be for your Bitcoin. It could be for a little bit of something. It could just be your passwords, right? It could just be your 2FA and your passkeys, just like a YubiKey. All of the above fit into that. So I do think ultimately we will have architectures that pull this into one device. But also it's clear to me at this point, I think that when you think about agentic AI and you think about like where the trajectory of things are on now, I think that by the time we get there, our interface to the internet could be completely different anyway.
I will say that one of the most fascinating aspects of blockchain technology is the movement of refugees through displacement that I don't think people fully recognize, right? Like it used to be you'd leave your homeland behind and you had to start fresh. Now with blockchain technologies, you can put all of your assets on a blockchain, have it ledger, go cross border with that and restart and resume your wealth, right? So you still leave a lot behind, but you don't leave everything behind. And it's an absolutely fascinating aspect of what the technology offers. And it's not a known, discussed use case because it's such a sad use case, but it's such a real use case on every level.
Maybe to make it a little happier, and because I think I completely agree. We know that the worst place to understand Bitcoin is the United States and the best place is Argentina. We know that already. And we know that if you hold pesos, you want to hold dollars. If you hold dollars, you want to hold Bitcoin. Everyone knows the first part of that. It's just not that everyone understands the second part of that yet. But I was thinking about, I wanted to tie this together with something that you were mentioning earlier with when you were talking about how during COVID and what you were experiencing. Advice I always give to people is attempt to live in the future. Living in the future is cheating because when you live in the future, you can see the future. And I'll tell you, like, I'm a record collector and I stopped collecting records a couple of years ago. And I think it's because I started collecting digital things. Every day I put another few records up on Discogs. I'm just like chipping away at slowly selling my collection. And I'm selling other things that I have too. I'm selling like rare luxury items that I have. I don't even want to store them anymore. I bought a really nice a Sarah Moon photograph a couple of years ago. I'm actually disappointed that it didn't come with any digital provenance. It somehow feels lesser to me. And I know that seems crazy to people, but I also know that I'm just living in the future. That just like in 1998, when I was trying to get media in my living room via the internet, I wasn't wrong. I was just early, right? And it's the same thing here. So I think that, again, that's where I come back to. We do lead digital lives. We are living through a once in humanity digitization of all value. And therefore, we will need, on some level, self-custody and security. And Ledger will play a part of that. Other places like Coinbase and Kraken and will too. It'll be heterogeneous. Sky is big, but it's inevitable.
My favorite place to play has always been being the crazy person until you're not, right? Like, so much fun. With the last question, I have the same question for the two of you, okay? And I love this because the two of you are never together. I want to give Ariel the last question, so I'm going to give this question to you first, Ian, okay?
Okay, I'm ready.
Since the two of you are never together on the same sort of discussion podcast with Ariel here, what is the one superpower or quality that Ariel has that people don't realize and should know about?
Oh, man. So first of all, yeah, we do usually divide and conquer. Also, Ari knows well that every time I'm talking to her and I hang up my phone, my wife turns to me and goes, damn, you're lucky to have her because she knows me and she knows Ari and she knows the picture. So what is the one superpower? I don't know that there's a one because it is it's a rare combination of things, right? Let me put it this way. What's obvious about Ari is that she has the creative background, right? That's the part that was a given when Ari came into the picture, right? She's got the creative background, and we all know a lot of people in that creative world that are super good at ideas and they're very bad at follow through and actually doing the work. I think that what people don't know about Ari is that she actually has the follow through and does the actual work. And really, like, when I'm telling you, the fire has been hot over the last 3 years when Ari has been with us, and she is always steady hand. You're never gonna knock her off balance. Right? It's always, wait, all right, what's really going on? What are we doing? How are we going to deal with it? And I think that part is probably much harder to come by and much less obvious.
Hold on. I love that. I couldn't agree with you more from every interaction I've ever had with her. Okay. Now that we're talking about you, behind your back and to your face, Ariel, if I was to throw the same question to you, what is it that people don't know about Ian? That's, wow, they should know this.
This is so nice, Keith. Thank you. I feel like I'm like at the end of a family therapy session or something.
That's the goal. Honestly, like maybe we'll change this to modern money. It's a modern money therapy.
I say this sometimes, and there's a couple of things about Ian, and I think that the combination is important. One, and I've said this recently actually, but Ian's actually a really good dad. And that's like deeply, consistently important to me because it really doesn't matter. It could be like the most important person to someone else coming by or for a call or something. And if he has a family commitment, he really keeps it. To me, there's something about Ian where it's the material value has no value. It's like the intrinsic value. And being able to discern that after so many years of being around influence, I actually think is really hard to maintain. So there's like a deep moral character there. And when you're working in our field, it's really easy to like jump for the carrot, but it means you still have the discernment for what actually matters in the long run. And so having someone to be able to work with and to learn from that's like that actually is really gratifying, because if I do have to have the heat on and keep the steady hand, I want to do it with someone that I give a shit about and that I think has the right heart. And then the second piece, and I always say this jokingly, with the smartness of it, Ian is like the Forrest Gump of the internet, but if Forrest was actually a smart savant, because he's been at every single point, like Ian was like in the room. It's just like you don't always know, but he was in the room. So also sometimes when you are making these short and long-term decisions, again, he's like, actually, I was there when we did this thing. And being early doesn't mean you were wrong, but it does mean like maybe sometimes things failed. So you have to maintain that perspective as well, because sometimes, and this is true for us as a brand, like we've made some cultural choices where we were a little bit too early on a couple of things. We're not wrong. We're just a little early. And now some of them are paying off, but it's like we've had to make these judgment calls. Yeah, I think it's like breath and death.
I think that what we've discerned here is that the name of this episode will be Run, Ledger, Run, right?
We'll take it. Yeah, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for the comment. You can cut this out if you want, but thank you for the comment about being a dad, because I've had 3 different parenting experiences, raising Zoe often by myself, being an absentee dad, living in Paris where my daughter lives in LA, and now being a stepfather. And I feel like a failure in all 3, but my heart's always in the right place. I do my very best in each case, but thank you for saying it.
Yeah, it's true.
Let me tell you both. Look, I was looking at the questions I wanted to ask, and as you both started to talk, I wrote down that question, right? That was not a prepared question. What I will say is I couldn't agree more with what both of you said about each other. You both are just such genuinely wonderful human beings. I'm so happy that you're in my life and that we've gotten to know each other and build together. I think one of the things I want to make sure that we do with this podcast as we push it out is I want people to see that there's really good people in this industry, that there's really smart people in this industry. I want people to see that there's real strategic people in this industry, right? So oftentimes the extremes are what get presented in this industry. And I don't think any of us represent the extremes, right? And in any industry, there are extremes, but sometimes those extremes take away from the people who are really building heads down over time, over years. And to have the two of you on today, I can't tell you how much it means to me. Thank you. And then to everyone who's listening, thank you for tuning in for Modern Money, right? I would say if you're watching and listening, please subscribe or share and stay tuned for future conversations.
Today's episode of Modern Money was hosted by Keith Grossman. This episode was researched and produced by Audrey Saccone and edited by Edgar Leal, with production support from Gabby Trujillo and the team at Trolley. Special thanks to the entire MoonPay team for making each episode possible. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and subscribe to Modern Money on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at MoonPay and at Modern Money Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time as we continue our conversations here on Modern Money.